In this final lesson, looking at topic number 2 for the Quest for Political Stability module for AQA A Level History, what we're going to do is just summarize essentially what we've been exploring in the previous lessons by examining the political, economic, and social condition of Germany by 1929, the point at which the Weimar Republic is probably at its peak in terms of stability, but also the point at which we see the eventual collapse and downfall of the Republic that we know. So Germany by 1929 was at a crossroads. The political, economic, and social conditions of the Weimar Republic reflected a mix of recovery on the one hand, but also unresolved tensions on the other. While much of the mid-1920s saw a period of relative stabilization, the Golden Age or the Golden Twenties, the underlying vulnerabilities still persisted. And that's what we're going to look at here. We're just going to basically do what we've been exploring in the previous lessons. We're just going to summarize all of the different aspects of German society, policy, and economy by 1929. So the political condition begins with an examination of the Weimar democracy. It was an established modern democratic constitution. It granted universal suffrage and civil liberties. Political stability improved in the mid-1920s, and this is especially under people like Gustav Stresemann, who began in 1923 as Chancellor and then would later serve as Foreign Minister until his death in 1929. There were still weaknesses, as we've mentioned in previous videos. There was fragmented parliaments. There was difficult to form stable governments. There was, between 1919 and 1929, 15 cabinets that Germany experienced. So this just illustrates just how unstable and how difficult the political system was. Article 48 of the Constitution, however, allowed the president to rule by decree when it came to emergency authorities, a power that undermined parliamentary democracy. We see that there is political opposition. The right, especially monarchists, militarists, and nationalist groups, rejected the Republic, and they viewed it as a betrayal of Germany's imperial past. Whereas the Nazi Party, the NSDAP, though relatively small in 1929, would continue to capitalize on the nationalist sentiment and the dissatisfaction among the conservative elites. When thinking about the left-wing opposition, the main opposer from the left of the Republic was the KPD, the German Communist Party, and they advocated for a Soviet-style revolution, and their influence was strongest in industrial areas. Mainstream challenges came from a variety of different places. The Social Democratic Party, the SPD, while supportive of the Weimar Republic, and while the largest party in the Reichstag, still nevertheless struggled to maintain the broad coalitions that existed. And then you see that smaller parties like the Centre Party and the German People's Party, the DVP, and the DPP, all clashed over policy, further complicating governance. In terms of foreign policy, there were various different things to be successful about, to think about successfully. Stresemann pursued reconciliation with Western powers and secured Germany's admission to the League of Nations. This was in 1926. And they also had a policy of, in 1925, negotiating the Locarno treaties to stabilize borders with France and Belgium. These efforts to improve Germany's international standing reduced the pressure of reparations, which we will talk about in a second, but also it attracted foreign investment. By 1929 then, Germany's industrial production had surpassed the pre-war levels. You have key industries such as steel, coal, chemicals, and electrical engineering all thriving during this period of time. You also have the introduction of foreign investment plans. The 1924 Dawes Plan and the 1929 Young Plan restructured the reparations payments and helped to facilitate substantial loans from the United States, which would further cause economic growth. We see the development of modern infrastructure projects, for example, roads, housing, public buildings, all of which transforming cities and improving living living standards and conditions in urban areas. Despite this, though, we have to make a reference to the fact that there was still very much some significant vulnerabilities within the German economy by 1929. Much of Germany's economic recovery relied on American loans. This reliance created a fragile economic foundation because any disruption from an outside external threat, such as the Wall Street crash, could cause a crisis to trigger in Germany, which we will see. It should also be noted that while industry did prosper during this period, the agricultural sector lagged behind. This was the result of a number of different factors, including overproduction, including falling prices, leaving many farmers in debt and discontented, and this all contributes to rural support for extremist parties. And then finally, in terms of vulnerabilities, we have to make reference to the fact that despite overall economic growth, unemployment within Germany by 1929 was relatively high. It was around 8% by 1929, and in 1929. This is, of course, nowhere near the kind of numbers that we will see later on when we see the Great Depression and the unemployment crisis that results. But at least by 1929, 8% is probably a higher than should be unemployment rate. And what this did was it reflected a number of things. It reflected structural issues, such as the slow pace of industrial modernization. It reflected the competition in global markets. It reflected the impact of the war and the impact of reparations that we're going to talk about now. So reparations would continue to strain the economy, even though the Young Plan reduced the total payments to just over 100 billion gold marks, and it extended the period to be repaid by up to 59 years. So despite those things, it would still continue to be a strain, and many still resisted the idea of reparations payments, who saw it as an ongoing humiliation. The German National People's Party, for example, the DNVP, would also challenge the reparations payments, but the most prevalent of that was, of course, the NSDAP, the Nazi party, who would use it to fuel anti-Weimar propaganda. In terms of society, by the end of the Weimar as we know it period, the sort of golden age period, you have class divisions from the working class, the middle class to the elites. The workers benefited from some wage increases, some employment insurance, and some improved labour rights. However, many still faced quite harsh working conditions, especially in industrial cities. And so we see most working class people supporting either Republican left-wing parties like the SDP, who supported the working class but also supported the Weimar Constitution, or anti-Republican left-wing parties like the KPD, the German Communist Party, who supported working class but they did not support the Weimar Constitution. Within the middle class, should I say, the suffering from the hyperinflation remained a very, very impactful event, and they remained skeptical of the Republic throughout. This is because many felt alienated by the rise of big business on the one hand and unionised labour on the other, gravitating them towards far-right parties such as the German People's Party, the DNVP, and then most prevalently the NSDAP, the Nazi Party. And then finally, the traditional aristocracy and the industrial elites still remained in very key, strong economic and cultural positions of power. They would often oppose the Republic, and they would long for the autocratic rule of the former imperial state. During the period of the Weimar Republic and the period of the Weimar experiment, we see that culture was vibrant, a vibrant cultural scene in urban areas such as Berlin. We noted this in the previous lesson. Art, film, theatre, and literature all flourished under the influence of a number of different movements, such as the Bauhaus movement, Expressionism movement, and the idea of new objectivity movements. This challenged traditional social ideas, progressive social changes, including women's rights, including secularism and urbanization, would clash with the conservative values in the rural and religious communities. Many young people, when it came to youth culture, embraced new forms of entertainment. You had dance halls, you had cinema, you had jazz music, all symbolizing the modernity of the Republic, but also, again, provoking a conservative backlash from the older generations. And then finally, we have the issue of militarism, and we have issue of the returning soldiers from the First World War. The legacy of World War I would foster a continued militaristic culture. You had many paramilitary groups, such as the Freikorps, playing a significant role in the suppressing of uprisings and the promoting of nationalist agendas. You had many ex-soldiers who felt alienated by civilian life, ex-soldiers including that of Adolf Hitler himself, who would then contribute, along with other ex-soldiers, to the growth of radical movements, particularly on the right wing of German politics. And so, in terms of concluding Germany at the eve of the collapse of democracy, essentially, by 1929, we can see that Germany had made remarkable strides in recovering from the devastation of the First World War and the crises of the early 1920s. When it comes to politically, the Republic was stable compared to its tumultuous beginnings, but it was still nevertheless fragile. And when we think economically, industrial growth and foreign investment created a sense of optimism, despite the fact that there were parts of society that lagged behind, particularly the agricultural class and the middle class. From a cultural perspective, Germany was at the forefront of modern cultural ideas and modernity, producing groundbreaking achievements in arts, sciences, and learning. These successes were underpinned then by these vulnerabilities, and we will see that it didn't take that much to see how fragile the Weimar system was, because on the eve of the Great Depression, we see these vulnerabilities bubbling under the surface, and then when we get to the Wall Street crash and the depression and the unemployment rise and the economic collapse, that this gives rise to a new power, this new power being the fascist right that we will start thinking about in the next lesson.